Before we proceed with this account, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to our YouTube channel. In the comments section, we kindly request your feedback on your preferred viewing platform. I was taken aback by the realization that my uncle was observing me, and I found myself in a rather disconcerting situation. It was a moment of unexpected vulnerability. On a quiet afternoon, the house was tranquil, and I had some uninterrupted time, which was a rare occurrence. My uncle had come to visit us for a few days, and while I was happy to see him, I didn't expect him to be around at that time. I thought he had probably gone out to the local market to buy some fruits and vegetables or to visit a friend. During afternoons, the house was generally quiet, allowing me some personal time, which was a rare occurrence. My uncle had come to visit us for a few days, and while I was happy to see him, I didn't expect him to be around at that time. I thought he had probably gone out to the local market to buy some fruits and vegetables or to visit a friend. I felt safe and cozy in the privacy of my room, enjoying the peace all by myself. I was lost in my thoughts, thinking about what I wanted to do next. Maybe I would read a book or play with some toys. The possibilities felt endless, and I was excited to spend the afternoon doing little. I had no idea that everything was about to change. Most significantly, I had heard people talk about growing up, but I never really thought about what it would feel like. Everything seemed new and exciting. My skin felt softer, and certain parts of me seemed to be growing faster than others. It was like my body was telling me things. I was in the process of becoming aware of the changes taking place, and my curiosity about them was mounting. One day, as I was lying on my bed, I started touching my arm, noting how smooth it felt. It seemed to be just a little curiosity, but then my hand moved almost on its own to other areas. I was in the early stages of understanding the changes taking place within me. One day, as I reclined on my bed, I began to explore my body, first by touching my arm and noting its smooth texture. Almost without thinking, my hand moved to other parts of my body. I was not thinking too much about what I was doing, it was simply a quiet moment of self-discovery. My fingertips brushed against areas that had previously gone unnoticed, and I felt a tingling sensation. It was an odd yet exciting feeling. I continued exploring, curious about why it made me feel that way, and I touched my growing. The sensations intensified, and I was unable to comprehend the nature of the experience. However, it was pleasurable, and I found myself unable to cease. I was in a state of introspection, relishing the tender caresses. My heart was beating more rapidly due to the excitement, and I felt a pleasant tingling sensation. It was an uncommon yet pleasant sensation. The sensation was both unusual and pleasant. I continued exploring my body, becoming more and more aroused. I was in my own space, enjoying the soft, gentle touches on my body. My heart was beating a little faster, but it didn't feel wrong, it just felt. I was delighted to be alone, exploring my body and learning about its sensations. I was excited to discover what it could feel like. I closed my eyes, enjoying the warm, peaceful feeling of being alone with myself. I felt safe and secure. I was delighted to be alone, and I was lost in the sensations. I didn't hear footsteps or the creak of the door. I had no idea that my uncle might be standing nearby, watching me from the shadows. For a while, it was just me, exploring and learning about my body in a new way. I was unaware of the ethical implications of my actions, as I had not yet developed the capacity to question such matters. I was solely focused on my own experience, which was being influenced by the unfamiliar sensations I was encountering. I was unaware that, at that very moment, my uncle was observing me from the shadows. I had not considered the ethical implications of the actions I had taken, as I was not yet equipped with the knowledge to question such matters. At the time, I was in a state of solitude, experiencing a range of unfamiliar emotions. I was unaware that my uncle was observing me discreetly during these moments of privacy. I had no suspicion that he was present, nor did I anticipate that he could be monitoring my actions. I was immersed in my own thoughts, oblivious to any external events. However, a sudden disturbance caused me to flinch. I became alert, hearing a faint creaking sound. I was unaware that my uncle was standing nearby. I was preoccupied with my thoughts, not imagining that someone was observing me, particularly my uncle. I was immersed in my own thoughts, unaware of any external activity. However, a sudden sound caused me to startle. The creak was soft, but it was loud enough to catch my attention in the silence of the house. I opened my eyes quickly, and for a moment I stood still, unsure of how to respond. My body reacted before my mind could process the situation. I grabbed the blanket and quickly covered myself, trying to conceal my heart, which was beating rapidly. The sound was soft, but it was loud enough to make my heart jump. I opened my eyes and saw that my body was reacting without my mind's ability to process the situation. I grabbed the blanket and pulled it over myself, trying to hide. My heart was racing so fast that it felt like it might burst out of my chest. I couldn't breathe. I lay there, my whole body tense, and I slowly looked towards the door, terrified of what I might see. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, please leave a comment to let me know you're still with me. And there he was, my uncle. I felt as if I might faint. I was unable to breathe. I lay there, my whole body tense, and I slowly looked towards the door, terrified of what I might see. If you are still watching this video and find the story inspiring, please leave a comment to let me know you're still with me. And there he was, my uncle. He was standing at the door, staring at me. His eyes were wide, and his face looked strange, almost frozen. He wasn't saying anything, just staring. He looked at me in a way that made me feel uncomfortable. My skin tingled, and it was like the air in the room suddenly became thick. I felt trapped under his gaze. Why was he looking at me? He stood at the door, his eyes wide, his face unreadable. He didn't say anything, just stared. His gaze made me feel uncomfortable. I felt a tingling sensation throughout my body, and the air in the room felt thick. I felt trapped under his gaze. Why was he looking at me like that? How long had he been standing there? I had many questions, but I couldn't find any answers. I felt exposed, embarrassed, and scared. I felt like my uncle, someone I thought I could trust, had seen me in a way no one else had. I had never imagined that Uncle I would see me in such a way. I was taken aback, and I inhaled sharply, attempting to maintain composure despite the rapid beating of my heart and the trembling in my hands. I struggled to project a normal tone of voice, but the sound of my own voice, tinged with apprehension, betrayed my inner turmoil. I had been exposed, and there was no denying it. My face felt flushed, and I was taken aback, and my voice quivered as I inquired, "Why are you looking at me like that?" I was eager to maintain composure, but I was overwhelmed. My heart was racing, and my hands were unsteady. I attempted to speak calmly, but I could hear the tremble in my voice. I had been exposed, and there was no denying it. My face felt flushed, and my mind was racing. I was trying to determine the next step, but my uncle remained silent. He stood before me, his gaze fixed on me with a peculiar, unsettling expression. His eyes were locked on me, and it made me feel invigorated. I could feel my stomach twisting with excitement. I couldn't stop wondering. I was trying to determine the appropriate course of action when my uncle suddenly stopped speaking. His eyes felt a surge of adrenaline. I was intrigued by the mystery surrounding his behavior. I inquired, "Why are you standing there? How long have you been observing me?" My voice was barely audible, as I was overwhelmed by excitement. I was filled with questions, but I couldn't find the answers. "Why are you looking at me like that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I was too excited to speak more loudly. I felt a surge of energy, and at the same time, I inquired about the reason for his presence, but my voice was barely audible due to the excitement I felt. I was experiencing a range of emotions, from a sense of invigoration to feelings of anger. I questioned his motivations for observing me in such a manner, considering the potential implications of such actions. I had presumed he was someone I could trust, but now I felt let down. He acknowledged his actions, stating that it was not appropriate for him to be monitoring me. However, his voice also exhibited a certain tension and low volume, which contributed to the overall sense of unease. I was experiencing a range of emotions, including shame, fear, and anger. I questioned his motivations for observing me, his lack of communication, and his actions. I felt exposed and vulnerable, and I was uncertain how to proceed. I felt betrayed by his actions, which were inconsistent with the trust one had placed in him. His voice also held an unusual quality, seemingly conveying emotions that I found difficult to identify. I felt a sense of unease, and I was reluctant to confront the situation. My emotions were in a state of fluctuation, oscillating between shame, fear, and anger. I found myself questioning his reasons for not leaving, for not speaking up sooner, and for observing me in the first place. I felt an overwhelming urge to retreat, to find solace in the ground beneath me. I felt vulnerable and exposed, and I was at a loss as to how to proceed. He remained silent, his actions and intentions unknown to me. He remained stationary, his eyes fixed on me. It was at this moment that I truly felt afraid. My heart began to race, and I could feel my body tense up. What would he do? What was Assis going to do? I kept thinking about it. I felt trapped. It was as if I was a small animal caught by a larger, more intimidating one, with no possibility of escape. I was at a loss for words. My thoughts were clouded, and I couldn't process any information coherently. I had always considered my uncle to be a part of the family. He was someone I thought I could trust, someone who was supposed to look out for me. But in that moment, I felt a sense of uncertainty about his intentions. However, his demeanor and the intensity of his stare were uncharacteristic, evoking a sense of uncertainty regarding his identity. This unexpected reaction heightened my anticipation for the unfolding events. I was intrigued by the shift in his behavior and the underlying emotions behind it. I felt compelled to voice my thoughts, yet I remained uncertain as to how or when the appropriate moment would arise. His behavior was so out of character that it was difficult to know how to respond. I felt compelled to interject, but the words eluded me. I remained motionless, my attention fixed on the unfolding events. My uncle closed the door behind him, the sound of the lock adding to the sense of entrapment. He did not leave, but rather stepped further into the room and sat down. He looked at me, but I couldn't form a coherent sentence. I remained motionless, waiting for further instruction. My uncle closed the door behind him, and I heard the lock click. He did not leave. Instead, he stepped further into the room and sat down on the edge of the bed. My heart was still racing, and I felt a sense of anticipation. I watched him carefully, my eyes wide with uncertainty. He looked at me for a moment, his face calm. We were both silent, just staring at each other. Then, finally, he spoke. "You've grown." At the edge of the bed, my heart was still racing, and I felt a sense of anticipation. I watched him intently, my eyes wide with questions. He looked at me for a moment, his face calm, as if nothing out of the ordinary had just transpired. We were both silent, just staring at each other. Then, after a moment, he spoke. "You've grown into a beautiful young lady." His words felt strange at first, but part of me wanted to believe him. Hearing someone say I was beautiful made me feel good, even though everything else felt so confusing. His voice was calm, and the way he said it almost made me feel safe. It was as if he wasn't upset with me for what had happened. The tension in the room immediately dissipated, and I felt a sense of relief wash over me. His words were reassuring, and while I still had reservations, I was inclined to believe him. However, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. At that precise moment, the tension in the room dissipated, and I experienced a sense of relief. The reassuring words of my uncle instilled in me a sense of optimism, although I couldn't shake off the nagging uncertainty. I dismissed these concerns, desiring to trust in the safety of the situation. As he sat nearby, my apprehensions gradually dissipated, and I felt more at ease. Then, my uncle approached me, his voice tinged with a conspiratorial quietness. "Shall we indulge in some leisurely activities?" he inquired. His words lingered in the air, and for a moment, I was uncertain how to respond. My mind was in a state of confusion, but my body exhibited a different response. I felt a peculiar sensation, as if I were being drawn in, and I couldn't comprehend it. My body felt warm and tingling, as if it were eager to comply. Despite my thoughts being overwhelmed with confusion, it was as if I was at a loss for words. My body's response was contrary to my expectations. I couldn't articulate the emotions I was experiencing, but they were palpable. I felt a strong pull toward my uncle, and I was intrigued by the sensations I was experiencing. I had been exploring my body independently, encountering sensations that I didn't fully comprehend. However, when my uncle arrived, the situation changed. He was present, observing me, and I had the remarkable notion that perhaps if another individual were to touch me, it might be more fulfilling. My body exhibited a response to his that was not anticipated. I was unable to articulate the nature of this response, but the emotions were palpable. I was drawn toward my uncle, and I felt a sense of excitement and temptation to follow his lead. I had been exploring my body independently, experiencing sensations that I did not fully comprehend. However, upon my uncle's arrival, the situation underwent a transformation. He was present, observing me, and I had the novel concept that it would be more pleasurable if another individual were to be in contact with me. This notion was unconventional, yet it invoked a sense of excitement within me. I provided my uncle with a subtle indication, but I refrained from verbalizing it. My actions conveyed my openness to his involvement, and it was as if I was subtly conveying my consent. Although I was not explicitly expressing it, the idea was genuinely enjoyable. I engaged in this behavior because I was curious to experience what it would be like with another person. My uncle delicately lifted the blanket, and I observed his eyes widen in surprise as I recognized the extent of my personal growth. It felt as though time had passed swiftly, and I was no longer the child he had played with in the past. He expressed his amazement with a warm smile, and I felt a range of emotions. It was gratifying to hear that he recognized the changes in me. He gently placed his hand on my shoulder, and I could sense his pride and happiness. It was a comforting gesture that made me feel appreciated. We shared a tender moment, and I sensed a deep connection between us. It felt like we were both acknowledging how much I had changed and how important our bond was. My uncle and I had a moment that felt strange and exciting. He gently removed our clothes and looked at each other. I was nervous, but I was also ready for what was about to happen. I could feel his warmth next to me, and my heart was racing when we finally came together. If you're still watching this video and find the story, if you have found this video inspiring, please leave a comment to let me know. It felt as if something special was beginning to unfold, as if a magical moment had arrived just for us. We moved slowly, as if we were dancers in a beautiful story, learning about each other in a way we had never done before. My heart raced with excitement, and I felt butterflies in my stomach, as if I were about to go on a fun adventure. We were on an incredible adventure. It felt as if we were discovering a whole new world. We began to feel as if something extraordinary had just commenced, as if a magical moment had arrived just for us. We proceeded with deliberate movements, as if we were dancers in a beautiful narrative, gradually becoming acquainted with each other in a novel way. My heart raced with excitement, and I felt a sense of butterflies in my stomach, similar to the anticipation experienced before an exciting adventure. We were on an incredible journey of discovery, as if we were exploring a whole new world. Every touch felt like a gentle spark lighting up our hearts. While there was a certain element of fear, it was also a warm and comforting experience. It was as if we were wrapping ourselves in a soft blanket on a chilly day. At that moment, all other concerns and distractions disappeared, and we were completely absorbed in the present moment. It was just the two of us, side by side, feeling a deep connection. We shared smiles and whispers, and it felt as if we were in our own private world. We were filled with curiosity, and every touch felt like a gentle spark lighting up our hearts. It was a little scary, but also warm and comforting. It was like wrapping yourself in a soft blanket on a chilly day. At that moment, nothing else in the world mattered. All the worries and noises around us faded away, and we were completely absorbed in the moment. It was just the two of us, side by side, feeling a deep connection. We shared smiles and whispers, feeling like we were in our secret place, where only we belonged. It was a moment we would always remember, a time when everything felt right and full of love. After a while, we knew we had to leave the room. We took a deep breath and got dressed, trying to act like nothing had happened. Like nothing had happened, we looked at each other and smiled, keeping our secret safe. It felt like a little adventure we had shared, and we both understood that it was something special. When we walked out of the room, everything we had found a place of solace, a secret sanctuary where we belonged. It was a moment etched in our memory, a time when everything felt right and full of love. After a while, we knew we had to leave the room. We took a deep breath and got dressed, trying to act like nothing had happened. Like nothing had happened, we looked at each other and smiled, keeping our secret safe. It felt like a little adventure we had shared, and we both understood that it was something special. When we walked out of the room, everything felt normal again. We talked and laughed like we always did, making silly jokes and teasing each other. It was as if that moment was just a dream, but we both knew it was real. From that day on, we carried our secret with us, and it made our bond even stronger. We knew we could trust each other with anything, and that made our friendship feel extra special. No matter what happens, we will always have that moment to remember, hidden away like a treasure in our hearts.